Pete Reiser played baseball like he was being chased by something invisible. He did not move through the game with caution. He attacked it. Every fly ball, every base path, every opening in the field. He treated all of it like a personal challenge. And that is what made him unforgettable. Long before modern warning tracks, padded fences, and teams terrified of injury risk, Pete Reiser played with a kind of recklessness that looked almost supernatural. He was not just talented, he was fearless in a way that now feels impossible. And that fearlessness is exactly what destroyed him. For a brief stretch in the early 1940s, Pete Reiser looked like one of the brightest stars baseball had ever seen. He could hit for average, get on base, run, field, and electrify a crowd in ways box scores never fully capture. As a young star with the Brooklyn Dodgers, he looked like the kind of player who could define an era. In 1941, he led the National League in batting average, runs, doubles, triples, on-base percentage, and total bases. He finished second in the MVP race, and if you looked at his age, his tools, and the force of his presence, it was easy to imagine a future filled with batting titles, MVP awards, and perhaps immortality. He was only beginning, and already he looked larger than the game around him. But Pete Reiser did not just play hard. He played like his own life meant less to him than the play in front of him. That is where the tragedy begins. In that era, many ballparks had unforgiving outfield walls, and Ebbets Field was one of them. There was no friendly padding to soften the impact. No modern safety design to protect a player sprinting full speed into danger. And Reiser, for all his brilliance, seemed almost magnetically drawn to those walls. He crashed into them again and again, pursuing catches that other players would have abandoned, refusing to slow down even when common sense demanded it. Fans admired it because bravery always looks beautiful from a distance, but beauty and damage were happening at the same time. That is what made Pete Reiser's story so cruel. He was not ruined by laziness. He was not undone by scandal, indifference, or a lack of talent. He was destroyed by the very quality that made him legendary. Every time he ran into a wall, it felt like another piece of his future was being taken away. Concussions, fractures, shoulder injuries, headaches, blurred vision. The punishment kept piling up. There were seasons interrupted, momentum shattered, and promise repeatedly pushed off course. And still, he kept playing the same way. Still, he kept charging. Still, he kept throwing his body into danger, as if the game itself demanded sacrifice. There is something haunting about that kind of athlete. Not because he lacks intelligence, but because he seems unable to betray the instincts that made him great. Pete Reiser could not stop being Pete Reiser. He could not become careful without also becoming less himself, and that is a devastating trap for any athlete. Fans often say they love players who leave everything on the field, but what they rarely face is the cost of that demand when a player actually does it. Reiser was one of those rare men who truly gave the game everything, and the game took nearly all of it back, because it was enormous. Enormous enough that people still wonder what might have been. And perhaps that is the hardest part. Pete Reiser was not just unlucky. He was trapped in a version of baseball that romanticized destruction. The same daring style that made crowds gasp also made coaches, writers, and fans praise the very behavior that was shortening his greatness. He became a symbol of courage, but courage without protection can turn into tragedy very quickly. Each collision carried the same message. This man would never stop. And each time, the consequences grew heavier. It was not one wall that ruined him. It was the same choice, over and over. The choice to go all out, no matter the cost. By the mid-1940s, what should have been the ascent of a superstar had become a battle against damage. The flashes of brilliance were still there, which may have made it worse. Reiser could still show people what he had once been. He could still remind them in moments of the greatness that was hiding under the pain. But baseball does not reward fragments of greatness the same way it rewards sustained excellence. And when your body keeps betraying the life your talent promised, even a gifted player can begin to feel like a ghost of his own future. What makes Pete Reiser's story linger is not just that he was broken. It is that he was broken in plain sight, in ways everyone could understand and almost no one could stop. Fans saw the crashes, teammates saw the injuries, the game kept moving, and so did he, as if there were no other way to live inside it. In another era, perhaps someone would have shut him down, changed his routes, protected him from the wall, insisted that survival mattered as much as spectacle. But in Pete Reiser's world, toughness was currency, and he kept paying with his body until there was almost nothing left to give. There is an old sadness attached to players like him because they remind us of something sports culture rarely admits. Bravery can become self-destruction when nobody knows how to draw a line. Reiser's style thrilled people because it looked pure. It looked noble. It looked like everything fans want from a hero. But underneath that heroism was a body-absorbing punishment it could not keep surviving. The collisions did not just bruise him, they altered the shape of his career. They stole continuity, rhythm, confidence, and time. They transformed what should have been a Hall of Fame path into a long argument with pain. And yet, even after the damage, Pete Reiser remained admired. That says something important. People did not forget him because he faded quietly. They remembered him because the intensity never stopped mattering. Even diminished, he carried the outline of the player he had once been. The player who could ignite a stadium and make baseball feel faster, louder, and more dangerous than usual. That is often the cruelest part of decline, when enough of the old brilliance survives to remind everyone what has been lost. Reiser was not erased by failure. He was haunted by his own potential. The phrase, "what might have been," gets overused in sports, but there are certain names that truly deserve it, and Pete Reiser is one of them. He was not a fringe talent with a romantic story attached later. He was a real star, a top-tier player, a man whose peak was strong enough to make the unfinished career hurt generations later. When people look back on him, they are not imagining some impossible fantasy. They are looking at an actual baseball force whose best years were shredded by the collision between instinct and environment. His tragedy was real because his greatness was real. And that is why the wall in his story feels almost like a character. It was not just a physical object sitting in the outfield. It became the symbol of everything baseball failed to protect him from. It represented the hardness of the era, the indifference of the sport, the applause for recklessness, and the terrible gap between admiration and care. Every time Pete Reiser sprinted toward it, the game held its breath. Every time he hit it, the cost of his legend increased. Over time, that wall stopped being scenery. It became destiny. In the end, Pete Reiser's story is not simply about injury. It is about the unbearable price of playing without fear in a game that was not built to protect fearless men. He became one of baseball's most heartbreaking figures because he did everything fans say they want from a star. He was bold, he was electric, he was relentless. He made impossible plays feel worth the risk. But when the risks finally swallowed the player, the applause could not give him back the career that had been taken from him. That is why his story still stings. Pete Reiser did not lose his future because he lacked heart. He lost it because he had too much of it. He chased every ball like it was the most important play of his life. And in doing so, he slowly turned his own body into a casualty of his courage. Baseball remembers many great players. It remembers some tragic ones. But Pete Reiser belongs in that rare category of athletes whose brilliance and suffering are impossible to separate. You cannot tell his story without talking about both. The agony of Pete Reiser was not just that he was hurt. It was that the very thing that made him heroic also made him vulnerable to ruin. He was brave enough to chase greatness without hesitation, and the wall met that bravery with merciless force. For a little while, he looked like he could become one of baseball's immortals. Instead, he became something sadder and in some ways more unforgettable. A reminder that sometimes the game does not just test talent. Sometimes it punishes courage,